Welcome, dear friends, to another session of Bible Plus Online. This week's session sees the start of a new series with the rather enigmatic title of I Am. And it is based on the sayings of Jesus in his ministry, where he uses this term I Am to underline who he is and what his mission is. And our first session this week takes us to the Old Testament to look at the foundations of this statement of I am and its significance both to the people of the Old and New Testament and to us today as well. One of the prime characteristics of the Scriptures is that it is seen as a revelation of God himself. The Bible tells us that God reveals himself to us in two ways. One, which is called general revelation, is through the very universe he's created, that we can find something about him and who he is through just studying the world and the universe round about us. But then the Scriptures take us deeper. They are called special revelation. They tell us things about God and about ourselves that we couldn't find out in any other way. And as we read through the Scriptures, God is revealing his nature to us and also his purposes in having created the universe and the reality in which we live. Some people refer to the God of the Old Testament as being distinct from the God of the New Testament, and I think that's a mistake. God is who he is. The New Testament, though, provides us with, if you like, the pinnacle of God's revelation, and that is the person of his Son, Jesus Christ, that he was the Word made flesh, God's revelation made flesh, himself made flesh, that we might truly understand God the Father as well. If you remember, Jesus in his ministry says, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." So we have three types of revelation in a sense. We have general revelation, the universe round about us, which we can study through our senses and science. We have special revelation in the written word that God has given us. We can think of the Old Testament law and the prophets, for example, and New Testament teachings. And finally, we see the perfect revelation of God himself in his Son, Jesus Christ. Well, our study today starts off in the Old Testament, right back in the book of Exodus. And in particular, we're looking at Exodus chapter 3, if you want to have a look at the story in detail in your own Bible. The character we find in Exodus chapter 3 is the man Moses. And all of those of you who know your Bible stories from Sunday school, you'll know them well. Moses was a member of the children of Israel who at the time that we're looking at were enslaved in the Egyptian Empire. And if you remember, Moses was a child who was saved from death when there was a purge against the children of Israel, which took the form of killing all the male babies. And you know the story about how Moses' mother placed him into a basket made of reeds and floated him on the Nile, and he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. And as a result, he was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and was brought up with all the privileges of the royal court in Egypt. Yet, when he was a man, he came across one day one of his countrymen being abused by an Egyptian taskmaster who was beating him. And Moses takes the law into his own hands and slays the Egyptian overseer. And he's found out and flees for his life. And he ends up in the wilderness looking after sheep, following the nomadic lifestyle of his father-in-law Jethro. And it's while Moses is out in the wilderness that he has an encounter with God. And if you know the story, you know that he saw a bush that was alight in the wilderness. But the strange thing about it was that the bush was not consumed. It says in Exodus 3, verse 2, he looked and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And God calls to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he said, here am I. And then he said, do not come near, put off your shoes from your feet, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. And Moses is amazed, and we find that God introduced himself, and he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And God reveals to Moses the purpose for which he has appeared to him for, and that it is that God is going to use Moses to go and set his people free from slavery in Egypt, and that he has to go and confront Pharaoh and say, as the good old song says, let my people go. Moses isn't exactly thrilled by this prospect. He feels quite inadequate and spends quite a lot of time trying to argue God that he was not the person to do it and that somebody else surely could be better than him. But God is insistent. And we find that when Moses seems to acquiesce to God's command, Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Well, what shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So the name that God reveals to Moses, his own name, is this phrase, I am, which seems a very strange name to us, or I am who I am. It seems a strange name to modern ears. Those of you who are good Old Testament students know that the name that is used very often in the Old Testament for God is the name Yahweh. The closest we can come to it by writing it in English is the what's called the Tetragrammaton. It's the word YWHW, and that is the Hebrew for I am, that I am. And it was such a sacred name that the Jews didn't use that name. You weren't allowed to say it because it was the name of God and it was so holy. And very often in the scriptures in the Old Testament we see the word Lord spelt in capital letters, and in the Hebrew that's telling us that the word Yahweh, the name of God, is being used at that particular point. Well, in Old Testament times particularly, names are very significant. And a name given to somebody by God usually has great relevance to who they are and possibly their mission in life. So when God says his name is I am, who I am, then we should take note of what that tells us about God. And at the root of it all, the phrase I am, used by God, means that he is the source of all being. It is a philosophically very profound statement. This is before, of course, we find the Greeks indulging in thoughts about what's the nature of being, why we're here, and so on and so forth. In philosophy, the topic ontology is the study of being itself. One of the oldest questions of human existence is, well, why am I here? Or more clearly, why is there something rather than nothing? And when we study this particular question, we can, if you like, crystallize human thought on this question into 4 possibilities. One of the first possibilities is, well, there isn't anything here really, that all that we imagine is here is an illusion. That's been something that's been bandied around for a long time, that reality isn't real at all, that it's just an illusion. And René Descartes, who was a very interesting philosopher, decided that if you couldn't, for example, trust the senses of your body, for example, that our eyes, can we trust what we see? Or our ears, can we trust what we hear? Or our sense of touch, can we trust that? If you took all that away, can you actually still say that you exist? And he paired all this back with quite forensic logic and came to the fact, or they came to the conclusion, that because he was able to think and therefore able to doubt, therefore he had to have existence. And we have this famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. So Descartes, if you like, was one of the prime people who removed the possibility that everything that we experience in the universe, and ourselves included, were just an illusion. Our second possibility is one which is quite popular today, and it's the idea, well, that the universe created itself. That, if you like, the universe exploded into being at what we call the Big Bang. But there are real problems with that. If we started off with nothing, then the question is, what could we possibly have now? There's a contradiction here. So that if the universe created itself, it would have had to have been before it was, which of course is impossible. The philosophers have come up with another little Latin phrase, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So that idea of something exploding out of nothing seems to be a dead end for us. Well, the third idea that people have come across is the idea that the universe is self-existent. And that really means that it has the power of being within itself. And if that's the case, the implications of that is that the universe is eternal. If it's self-existent, it has the power of being within itself, and therefore it cannot not be. Well, this is a problem for us as well. We know that current cosmology tells us that we are in an expanding universe. As time goes forward, that the universe seems to be expanding, and in fact expanding more and more quickly, and the current theories suggest that we will end up in what's called thermal death. And of course the idea of the Big Bang came from the fact that if you see the universe as being like a picture of an exploding grenade, half a second after it's exploded, if you wound the film back, rather than the parts of the grenade moving further and further away from each other, they will get closer and closer and closer to each other. And that's where we get our sense of the age of the universe from. And science tells us that, well, it can explain the processes that go on right back to the very first, if you like, nanoseconds of what we now call time. They view it as what is called a singularity. And at that point, where the whole of the universe is concentrated into a very, very small space, our current understanding and our scientific laws and rules just break down. Some people argue that the singularity, that early phase of the universe, could have been there forever. But that begs the question of, well, why the change? What change that caused the expansion? Well, our final possibility that people have come across is that the idea that the universe was created by something that is self-existent. And therefore, that something which is self-existent is eternal. And theologians would argue that the something that is self-existent that created the universe is not so much as something as a someone. So the idea that the universe was created by someone that is self-existent, therefore eternal, someone who has the power of being within himself. And of the four possible arguments or answers to the question, why is there something rather than nothing, the fourth one is the one which is logically most robust. It's sometimes called the ontological argument for the existence of God, if you want a big long word to use in Scrabble. And it's of course interesting that the scriptures start in Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. God is the self-existent one, the one who has the power of being in himself, has the power to create the universe and the reality in which we live. So this reveals the fact that God is different from us. He is uncreated. We are created. And he is self-existent. And we, if you like, are contingent beings. He is uncaused, but we are caused by God. And it's interesting that when the church fathers were trying to formulate what we now call the creeds, if you like, the crystallized beliefs and doctrines of the Bible, they referred to Jesus as being begotten, not created. And of course, this equates him with God again in the fact that he has the power of being within himself. And so we have phrases like co-equal, co-eternal, and consubstantial. And as we progress our way through the New Testament, we find that Jesus is seen as the being through whom the universe was made. A very well-known passage in the scriptures is the start of the Gospel of John, which starts with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was in the beginning with God. What's often missed out, though, is verse 3, which says, through him all things were made. And just to reinforce the point, it goes on, without him nothing was made that has been made. And in some theological circles, Jesus is referred to as being the Creator God. The Creator God. And taking Genesis 1 and John chapter 1 together, we see the Trinity in action. If you like, the origin of creation is God the Father. The agent of creation is God the Son, and the means of creation is God the Holy Spirit. Now we know that the scriptures tell us that God is spirit, and the amazing thing about Jesus, of course, is that he became flesh. John tells us in his first chapter that, and the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. That who was pure spirit became both spirit and flesh, spirit in the flesh. He took upon himself human nature, so he was one in person, the Son of God, but two in nature, fully human, yet fully divine. He is, if you like, a bridge, an interface between the Godhead and the physical universe in which we live. He was the conduit through whom the universe was made. That the being of the universe is contingent upon the eternal being, the self-existent being of God in the person of God the Son. Well, this all sounds very involved, but it's an essential understanding, or it's an essential foundation if we're going to have a true understanding of how Jesus uses this statement, I am, in his ministry. We've seen that God is saying, by giving his name as I am, Yahweh in the Old Testament, he's giving the understanding that he is the self-existent one, that he is the origin of all being, that the whole universe is different from him in that we are contingent, we are created beings, we are not the creator, we're distinct from him. And Jesus comes as the self-existent Son of God with the power of being within himself, and therefore the power of creation with himself. And this should lead us to an understanding of how Jesus could do so many miracles, because he had this power of being and creation within himself. Well, we're going to next time start looking at some of the 7 particular I am statements that Jesus used to reveal his divinity to people during his ministry. So the 7 I am statements we're going to look at reveal much about who he is and what his ministry is as well. I hope you've stuck with us through all that, and until next week when we start looking at the first I am statements, God bless you until we meet again.